The Apache widow invited the rancher on Christmas Eve, and the night ended in the same bed. The wind whispered softly through the bare branches, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and wood smoke from chimneys. Snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, settling gently on rooftops, fences, and the frozen ground. The world felt still, as if everyone were waiting for something magical to happen. For most people in town, it was just another Christmas Eve, but for the Apache widow, the night carried a different weight. She lived alone in a modest, wooden house at the far edge of the town. The house had stood there for many years, built by her late husband, a man who had loved the land and the simple life it offered. Since his passing, she had continued to care for the home and the small garden in front, keeping it neat and warm, even in the harsh winters. Her life had become a quiet routine, one filled with memories of laughter and stories shared beside the fireplace. Yet, tonight, for some reason she could not explain, she felt a flicker of anticipation in her heart. Across the plains, the rancher was finishing his chores. His day had been long and exhausting, tending to his cattle and repairing fences before the snow made the land difficult to manage. He was a man of few words, respected by everyone in town for his honesty and hard work. He had lived alone for many years, carrying the weight of his responsibilities silently. Yet, despite the strength and resilience he displayed to the world, he too felt the pang of loneliness that Christmas seemed to amplify. Earlier that evening, as the widow prepared her small home for the night, she decided, almost on impulse, to do something different. She carefully set the table with her best dishes, polished the silverware, and lit the candles that filled the room with a soft, warm glow. The aroma of roasted meat, fresh bread, and spiced tea began to fill the house. She paused for a moment, holding a plate in her hands, and wondered if anyone would ever share this space with her again. Then she thought of the rancher. The idea came to her naturally, almost like a gentle nudge from fate. Why not invite him over? He lived nearby, and she had often seen him pass by her house, always busy, always alone. She remembered the small gestures he had shown, how he had once helped repair her fence when it broke, how he had given a polite nod when their paths crossed on the snowy roads. Perhaps tonight, she thought, they could share a meal, talk, and for a few hours, feel less alone. She wrapped herself in a warm shawl and walked through the snow to his ranch. The rancher was surprised to see her at his door, holding a plate of bread and smiling nervously. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," she said softly. "I thought maybe you would like to join me for Christmas Eve dinner." He blinked, caught off guard by the invitation. He was not used to being invited anywhere, especially not by someone as kind and thoughtful as her. For a moment, he hesitated, unsure of what to say. Then, seeing the genuine warmth in her eyes, he nodded. I would like that very much," he replied, his voice low but sincere. They walked together through the snow, their footprints creating a small path behind them. The widow talked quietly about the small things in her home, the fire crackling in the fireplace, the decorations she had placed around the room, the scent of the tea she had brewed. The rancher listened, intrigued by her gentle way of seeing the world. For a man accustomed to the hard, silent life of the ranch, it was refreshing to hear someone speak with such care and attention. When they arrived at her house, the warmth from the fireplace enveloped them immediately. The soft light flickered across the walls, casting shadows that danced like old friends. The table was set beautifully, with plates, silverware, and candles arranged in perfect order. The rancher was impressed, not by the wealth of the meal but by the effort and thought she had put into creating a welcoming space. They sat down to eat, and at first, the conversation was cautious, polite. They spoke of the weather, the town, and the chores that kept their days busy. But as the meal progressed, the ice began to melt. The widow shared stories of her late husband, tales of his kindness and the life they had built together. She spoke not with sadness alone, but with a quiet pride in the memories they had created. The rancher listened intently, occasionally sharing stories of his own, a childhood spent on the plains, the challenges of ranch life, and the little joys that came from working the land. Slowly they found common ground, discovering that despite their different lives, they shared similar values: resilience, honesty, and a love for simple, meaningful moments. Laughter began to fill the room. Small, gentle laughter at first, then more genuine, unrestrained chuckles that echoed softly against the walls. The widow found herself smiling more freely than she had in months, enjoying the presence of someone who seemed to understand her unspoken thoughts. The rancher, too, felt a warmth he had not felt in years, the simple joy of being with someone who saw him not as a worker or a loner, but as a person. After dinner, they moved to the living room, sitting near the fire. The widow offered him a cup of tea, and they continued to talk, sharing more personal stories and memories. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in a quiet, sparkling blanket. Inside, the fire's warmth, combined with the glow of human connection, made the house feel like a small haven against the cold. As the evening wore on, the widow noticed the rancher shivering slightly. She fetched a blanket and draped it over his shoulders, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. The rancher thanked her quietly, a blush creeping onto his cheeks. It was a moment of shared vulnerability, an unspoken acknowledgement that both of them were opening their hearts in a way they had not expected. Time seemed to slow. The snow continued its gentle descent, the fire crackled, and the two of them sat together in comfortable silence. Neither felt the need to fill the space with words. Their presence alone was enough. The widow thought about how rare this moment was, how unexpected, and yet how perfectly it seemed to fit. The rancher felt a similar sentiment, realizing that connection could be found even in the most unlikely circumstances. As the clock neared midnight, signaling the end of Christmas Eve, neither wanted the night to end. But they both knew that life would continue, chores and responsibilities awaiting them in the morning. Still, they were content with what had passed, knowing that this night had created a bridge between two lonely hearts. Before he left, the rancher stood by the door, looking at the widow with quiet admiration. "Thank you," he said simply. "This has been more special than I could have imagined." She smiled softly, her heart full. "It has been for me as well," she replied. "Perhaps we can do it again sometime." He nodded, a small, genuine smile appearing on his face. With that, he stepped into the snowy night, leaving footprints behind him that would soon be covered by the falling snow. The widow watched him go, feeling a mixture of warmth and longing. She returned to the fire, her heart lighter than it had been in years, knowing that a new chapter was beginning, one filled with hope, companionship, and the quiet magic of human connection. And so, Christmas Eve came to an end. But for both the Apache widow and the rancher, the night had marked the start of something far more meaningful than a simple holiday gathering. It was the night when two lonely souls had found comfort, warmth, and the possibility of friendship, or perhaps even love, in each other's company. The morning after Christmas Eve arrived quietly, blanketing the town in a fresh layer of snow. The streets sparkled under the pale winter sun, and the soft crunch of footsteps echoed through the empty lanes. Inside her cozy wooden home, the Apache widow woke with a sense of calm she had not felt in years. Last night's dinner with the rancher had stirred something within her, a feeling of warmth, companionship, and hope. She moved about her kitchen, humming softly to herself as she prepared a simple breakfast. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, mingling with the scent of toasted bread and honey. Memories of the previous night lingered vividly in her mind, the laughter, the stories, the quiet moments by the fire. Every small gesture from the rancher had left an impression. The way he had listened so intently, the gentle way he smiled, the occasional nod of understanding when she spoke about her life. Across the snow-covered plains, the rancher was also reflecting on the evening. He had returned to his home, settling near the fire with a cup of tea, his thoughts drifting repeatedly back to the widow's house. For someone accustomed to long days of hard work and solitude, the experience had been unexpectedly profound. It was not simply a meal shared, but a connection formed. A bridge had been built between two hearts that had long carried the weight of loneliness. That morning, the widow decided to visit the rancher. The thought of seeing him again so soon brought a nervous excitement, a flutter in her chest she had not felt in years. She dressed warmly, wrapping a thick scarf around her neck and sliding her boots over her feet. The snow crunched beneath her steps as she made her way across the short distance to his ranch. She wondered if he would be surprised, or perhaps even hesitant. But a quiet hope encouraged her forward, the kind that comes only when one senses a chance at genuine companionship. When the rancher opened the door, he was caught off guard but pleased. "Good morning," he said, his voice roughened by sleep but warm. "I wasn't expecting company so soon." "I thought I could bring some breakfast," she replied, smiling. "I made enough for two." He stepped aside, allowing her to enter. The interior of his home was simple, yet it carried a sense of comfort. There was a modest fire in the hearth, a few pieces of sturdy furniture, and the faint scent of hay and earth, a reminder of his work and life on the ranch. She set the breakfast on the table, and they sat down together. Over the meal, the conversation flowed easily, far more naturally than the night before. They spoke of small joys, the way sunlight reflects on snow, the sound of birds in the morning, the subtle beauty of everyday life. It was a conversation filled with genuine curiosity and attention, each listening intently to the other. The widow spoke of her garden, how she had managed to keep it alive even through harsh winters, and the rancher shared stories of the animals he cared for, the challenges of raising cattle in cold weather, and the little triumphs that brought him pride. As the meal came to an end, the rancher suggested they take a walk outside. The widow agreed, and they stepped out into the crisp winter air. The snow was untouched in many places, sparkling like tiny crystals under the sun. They walked side by side along the edge of the ranch, the silence between them comfortable and easy. Occasionally, they pointed out footprints in the snow, talked about the patterns of birds, or laughed softly at the way the wind swirled around them. During their walk, the widow asked about his family. The rancher spoke sparingly but honestly, telling her about his childhood on the plains, about his parents and siblings, and the responsibilities that had shaped his early years. He admitted that life had not always been easy, that many days had felt heavy with work and solitude. Yet, as he spoke, there was no bitterness, only acceptance and the quiet pride of a man who had faced life's challenges with dignity. The widow, in turn, shared stories of her late husband. She spoke of their shared dreams, the small joys they had treasured, and the challenges they had overcome together. Her voice carried a mixture of nostalgia and tenderness, and for a moment, it seemed as if the past and present coexisted in harmony. The rancher listened without interruption, sensing the depth of her experience and the strength that had carried her through grief. They found themselves at a small wooden bridge overlooking a frozen creek. The snow-covered banks reflected the sunlight, creating a scene that seemed almost magical. Here, their conversation shifted from stories of the past to thoughts about the future. The widow spoke of her desire to continue living fully, to not let the years pass by without connection and joy. The rancher admitted that he too had been searching for more than mere routine and work, for a sense of companionship that had long eluded him. It was a rare and tender moment. Neither spoke of love outright, but both felt its gentle presence growing between them. They understood that human connection was not something to be rushed or forced. It came softly, like the snowflakes drifting around them. The rancher reached out instinctively to brush a few loose strands of hair from the widow's face, and she smiled at him, a gesture that conveyed trust, warmth, and mutual understanding. As the afternoon unfolded, They returned to her home to warm themselves by the fire. They sat with mugs of tea, the soft steam curling into the air, and talked about dreams, hopes, and the small pleasures that made life meaningful. The widow showed him some of her handmade crafts, small ornaments she had prepared for the town's children, and the rancher admired her skill and dedication. He shared some sketches he had made of the ranch, little drawings that captured the quiet beauty of the land and the animals he loved. The conversation gradually shifted to lighter topics, books they had read, songs they enjoyed, and memories from childhood holidays. Laughter filled the room, echoing softly against the walls. The rancher's deep chuckle blended with the widow's gentle giggles, creating a sense of ease and comfort that neither had expected to find so quickly. By evening, the snow had stopped, leaving the world outside glittering under the soft light of the setting sun. The rancher rose to leave, but neither was ready to part immediately. They stood near the door, sharing a moment of quiet reflection. "Thank you for this afternoon," the rancher said softly. "It has been unexpectedly wonderful." The widow smiled, her heart swelling with warmth. "I feel the same way. It's rare to find someone who understands even a little of what life has been like." Before leaving, the rancher paused and looked at her thoughtfully. "Would you perhaps join me for another walk tomorrow morning, if the weather allows?" Her eyes lit up and she nodded eagerly. "I would like that very much." As he walked back to his ranch, both of them felt a sense of anticipation. It was not the excitement of sudden romance, but the quiet thrill of a connection that promised companionship, understanding, and perhaps the beginnings of trust and friendship that could grow into something deeper over time. That night, the widow sat by her fireplace once again, the room glowing warmly as she reflected on the day. She realized that Christmas Eve had been just the beginning of a journey she had longed for, one that involved sharing moments, stories, and laughter with someone who could understand and value her presence. The rancher, sitting in the solitude of his home, felt similarly. The seeds of trust and mutual respect had been planted, and he was eager to nurture them, step by step. Though the snow continued to cover the town in silence, the two hearts that had met by chance on Christmas Eve were quietly moving closer together, bound by shared stories, laughter, and the warmth of human connection. They had discovered that even in the coldest months, warmth could be found in a smile, a kind word, or the simple act of being present for another person. And so, Christmas Day approached, carrying with it a new sense of hope and possibility. For both the Apache widow and the rancher, the day promised not only celebration and tradition, but also the quiet, unspoken promise of companionship. The world outside remained white and still, but inside their hearts, something new had begun, a connection that neither time nor distance could easily diminish. The morning after Christmas, the sun rose slowly over the snow-covered plains, casting a pale golden glow across the town. The air was crisp, filled with the smell of frost and pine, and the world seemed quieter than usual. The Apache widow woke early, her mind still replaying the events of the previous day. The dinner, the stories, the laughter, they all felt like a dream she didn't want to end. She could not shake the anticipation of seeing the rancher again, of continuing the conversation they had begun. She dressed quickly in warm layers and wrapped herself in a thick scarf. As she stepped outside, the snow crunched beneath her boots, and the sun reflected off the icy surfaces, creating a dazzling sparkle all around. Her heart beat a little faster with excitement and a touch of nervousness. She wondered if he would actually be waiting, if he would share the same eagerness for the morning walk she felt. When she arrived at his ranch, he was already outside, checking the fence lines and brushing snow off the barn roof. He looked up when he saw her and a warm smile spread across his face. "Good morning," he greeted, his voice gentle and sincere. "I'm glad you came." "Good morning," she replied, smiling back. "The snow is beautiful today. It feels like the perfect day for a walk." They set off together across the open land, moving slowly so they could take in the scenery. The plains stretched endlessly around them, white and quiet, with only the occasional tree breaking the horizon. The air was sharp but invigorating, making every breath feel fresh and alive. The rancher led the way toward a small hill that overlooked the town, a place he often visited to enjoy the view and reflect. As they walked, the conversation flowed easily. They spoke of simple pleasures, the sound of the wind in the trees, the tracks left by animals in the snow, the way sunlight reflected off frozen streams. Each observation was met with shared laughter or thoughtful nods, a rhythm of understanding and attention that grew more comfortable with every step. The widow noticed how attentive he was, how he listened without interruption, how he seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and opinions. At the top of the hill they paused, looking out over the town below. Smoke rose gently from chimneys, and the streets glittered with frost. It was a peaceful, almost magical scene, and the widow felt a sense of serenity she had not experienced in years. The rancher stood beside her, his hands tucked into his coat pockets, and for a long moment neither spoke. They simply took in the view, feeling the quiet strength of the world around them and the unusual warmth of being together. Breaking the silence, the rancher spoke softly. "I've lived here for most of my life, and yet I never noticed how beautiful the town looks in winter like this. There's a kind of stillness, a calm I don't often feel." The widow nodded. "It's easy to forget the little things when life gets busy. Sometimes it takes stepping back, or walking with someone who notices the beauty with you to truly see it." He looked at her, a flicker of surprise and admiration in his eyes. "You have a way of seeing the world differently." "I've spent years focused on work and survival, and I think I forgot how to notice moments like this." Their walk continued, and with each step, they shared more about their personal histories. The rancher talked about his days growing up on the plains, about his parents' teachings, and the responsibility he had carried from a young age. The widow shared stories of her late husband, of the life they had built together, and the quiet strength she had learned to find in solitude. Their words were sincere, heartfelt, and without pretense. Each revelation seemed to deepen their understanding of one another, weaving a quiet bond of trust and empathy. They reached a small grove of trees near the edge of the hill, where the snow had drifted in soft, sparkling piles. The rancher noticed a small bench beneath a large oak tree and gestured toward it. "Shall we rest for a moment?" he asked. The widow agreed, and they sat side by side, the bench creaking slightly under their weight. She looked at him, noticing the lines etched by years of hard work and the quiet determination in his posture. He, in turn, observed her gentle composure and the light in her eyes that spoke of kindness, resilience, and a hidden joy in simple pleasures. For a while they sat in companionable silence, watching the world around them. The snow fell lightly, dusting their shoulders and hair, and the wind carried the crisp scent of winter through the grove. It was a peaceful moment, yet beneath it, both of them felt an unspoken connection growing, a recognition of kindred spirits who had found comfort in each other's presence. Breaking the silence, the widow spoke. "Do you ever think about how strange life can be? How it brings people together in the most unexpected ways?" The rancher nodded. "Yes, I never imagined that a simple invitation for dinner could lead to this, but I'm glad it did. It feels right somehow." She smiled softly, feeling the truth of his words. "I feel the same. There's a warmth here, not just from the sun or the fire we sat by, but from being with someone who listens and cares." The conversation shifted then to lighter topics. They talked about favorite books, songs that reminded them of childhood, and small traditions that had survived the years. The widow shared memories of holidays with her late husband, and the rancher recalled the playful tricks his siblings had pulled on one another during winter festivities. Their laughter mingled with the soft rustle of the trees, creating a sense of joy that was both spontaneous and comforting. After some time, they continued their walk down the hill, heading toward a frozen pond near the edge of the grove. The rancher paused to test the ice's thickness with a stick, ensuring it was safe for them to approach. The widow followed, her boots crunching in the snow, and together they admired the pond's smooth, glassy surface. The reflection of the sky on the ice, mixed with the shadows of surrounding trees, made it look like a delicate painting. Here, they shared stories of dreams and ambitions, not just the practicalities of life, but the hopes they had held quietly in their hearts. The rancher spoke of a desire to perhaps expand his ranch, to build a small greenhouse for the winter months, and even to travel someday. The widow admitted she had longed to take up painting again, a hobby she had abandoned after her husband passed, and to write stories about the land and people she had known. As the afternoon sun began to lower in the sky, they returned to her house. The snow outside glimmered in the waning light, and the house welcomed them back with the warmth of the fire she had kept burning. Inside, the widow prepared a small tray of warm tea and bread. They settled near the fireplace once more, the room filled with the gentle crackle of burning wood. This time, the conversation turned toward reflection. The widow spoke of her fears, the worry of loneliness, the challenge of moving forward while honoring the past. The rancher shared similar feelings, admitting that years of isolation had made it difficult for him to trust, to open his heart fully. Yet, sitting together, they found reassurance in one another's presence. The shared vulnerability created a bridge of trust, and the quiet confidence that they were not alone in facing life's uncertainties. As evening approached, the widow suggested they step outside one last time to see the sunset over the plains. The rancher agreed and they walked together, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold. The snow reflected the colors, creating a breathtaking landscape that seemed almost unreal. They stood together, side by side, watching as day slowly gave way to twilight. For a long while, neither spoke. Words were unnecessary. The moment itself was enough. It was a silent acknowledgement that connection and companionship were not always expressed through grand gestures or declarations. Sometimes they were found in shared experiences, in laughter, in the quiet act of being present for another person. When it was finally time to part, the rancher turned to the widow. "Today has been wonderful," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "Thank you for letting me share it with you." The widow smiled, her heart warmed by his words. "And thank you for sharing it with me. It's rare to find someone who understands, who listens, and who cares as much as you do." They parted with a promise to meet again the next day, each returning to their home with a sense of anticipation and joy. The bond between them had grown stronger, grounded not in fleeting attraction, but in shared experiences, respect, and understanding. That night, as the widow sat by her fireplace, she reflected on the day's events. The laughter, the walks, the quiet conversations, they had all brought a sense of connection she had long thought impossible. The rancher, lying awake in his home, felt similarly. For both, the simple moments of companionship had created a profound sense of warmth and hope. As the snow fell softly outside, the two hearts, separated by only a few miles, were quietly moving closer together. Each step, each story, each shared smile was a thread weaving them together, creating a connection that promised not only friendship but the possibility of something lasting, meaningful, and truly rare. The day after their morning walk, the air was crisp, but the sun shone brightly, casting long shadows over the snow-covered town. The Apache widow awoke with a sense of quiet anticipation. Each day with the rancher brought a subtle excitement she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just the companionship, but the comfort of sharing thoughts, worries, and dreams with someone who listened without judgment. She spent the morning preparing a small lunch, arranging the table carefully, and baking a simple apple pie. The act of preparing food for another person gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't realized she missed. The aroma of the pie filled her home, mingling with the scent of pine from the firewood she had stacked neatly in the corner. She wondered if he would notice these little details, if he would understand the care behind each gesture. Meanwhile, the rancher was tending to his cattle, checking fences, and making sure the animals were safe in the winter cold. But even amid the routine of his work, his thoughts kept drifting back to the widow. He thought of the quiet strength she displayed, her gentle smile, and the way she seemed to see the beauty in the world, even during difficult times. He realized that he was beginning to look forward to their time together, that her presence brought a calmness he hadn't known he needed. When the widow arrived at the ranch later that morning, the rancher greeted her with a warm smile. "Good morning," he said. "I hope I'm not keeping you from your chores." She shook her head, smiling. "I wanted to come here. I thought we could have lunch together." They entered his home, which was modest but comfortable. The fire crackled in the hearth, and the warm light made the room feel inviting. They sat down at the small wooden table, and she served the simple lunch she had prepared. It wasn't extravagant, but it was filled with thoughtfulness, and the rancher appreciated it deeply. As they ate, their conversation grew more personal. The widow spoke about her fears of being alone, the struggles she had faced after losing her husband, and the quiet moments of loneliness that sometimes overwhelmed her. The rancher listened intently, nodding with understanding. Then he shared some of his own vulnerabilities, how years of isolation on the ranch had made it difficult for him to trust others, and how he sometimes felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. "I've spent so much time focused on work and survival," he said quietly, "that I forgot what it feels like to connect with someone, to really connect." The widow reached out, placing a hand lightly on his arm. "It's never too late," she said softly. "We can choose to share our lives, even if it's just in small ways at first." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden noise outside. A branch had broken under the weight of snow, falling near the barn. The rancher stood quickly, checking to ensure the animals were safe. The widow followed, helping him clear the snow and secure the area. Their teamwork, even in such a small task, created a sense of camaraderie. It was a simple reminder that they could rely on each other, that trust was growing naturally between them. After the task was complete, they returned inside, brushing off snow from their coats and boots. The warmth of the fire welcomed them back, and they settled near it, sipping tea and reflecting on the day. The widow spoke of her late husband again, not with sadness, but with a sense of reverence for the life they had shared. The rancher shared more stories of his childhood, painting pictures of winter adventures and small joys that had shaped him. As the afternoon progressed, the conversation turned to their hopes for the future. The widow admitted that she had longed to find someone to share her days with, not necessarily to replace the past, but to create new memories. The rancher confessed that he had also yearned for companionship, someone to walk beside him through the challenges and joys of life. There was a pause, a quiet moment of understanding. Neither spoke, but both felt the weight of unspoken words, the realization that they were beginning to care deeply for one another. The connection they had been building over the past few days was no longer just friendship. It was something deeper, something rooted in trust, respect, and shared experiences. The widow suggested they take a short walk before the sun set. They wrapped themselves in warm coats and stepped outside. The snow reflected the soft light of the late afternoon, creating a magical glow over the plains. As they walked, the rancher noticed how naturally she moved, how her presence seemed to blend seamlessly with the landscape. It reminded him of the quiet beauty of the world, a beauty he had overlooked in his solitary life. They reached a small clearing where the snow lay undisturbed. The widow paused and looked around, her eyes reflecting the soft light of the setting sun. "It's moments like this," she said, "that remind me why life is worth living." The small things, the quiet moments, the connections we make, they matter more than we realize. The rancher nodded, standing close beside her. I feel the same. Being here with you, it makes everything seem simpler, lighter. For a long moment they stood together in silence, the wind whispering through the trees and the snow sparkling around them. The rancher reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from the widow's face, and she looked up at him, a soft smile on her lips. There was no rush, no expectation, only a quiet acknowledgement of the bond that had formed between them. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the plains, they began to walk back toward her house. The conversation turned lighter again, filled with laughter and shared observations about the snow, the birds, and the playful tracks left by animals in the yard. Yet beneath the light-hearted talk, there was a sense of emotional intimacy, a growing understanding that they were becoming important parts of each other's lives. When they arrived at her home, the widow suggested they sit by the fire one more time before the day ended. The rancher agreed, and they settled near the hearth, the warm light dancing across their faces. They spoke of memories, of lessons learned, and of the quiet moments that had shaped them. There was a sense of mutual respect and admiration, a recognition that each had endured hardships and carried strength in their own way. As evening fell, the widow offered to prepare a simple supper. They worked together in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, stirring sauces, and arranging the table. The act of cooking side by side was comforting, a symbol of shared effort and companionship. They laughed over small mistakes, exchanged stories, and discovered new layers of familiarity and trust. After supper, they returned to the living room where the fire crackled warmly. The rancher looked at the widow and said, I feel lighter somehow. Being with you makes me forget the loneliness I've carried for so long. She reached out and took his hand, a gentle but meaningful gesture. And you've reminded me that life doesn't have to be lived alone. There's joy in sharing it, even in the smallest ways. They sat together in quiet reflection, the room filled with a gentle warmth that went beyond the fire. Outside, the snow continued to blanket the world, soft and serene, but inside, the connection between them was growing stronger. It was a night of emotional revelation, of understanding, and of mutual appreciation for the journey they were beginning together. As the clock ticked toward late evening, they knew it was time to part for the night. The rancher stood at the door, looking back at the widow with sincerity in his eyes. Thank you, he said softly, for today, for everything. I feel happier than I have in a long time. The widow smiled, feeling the same warmth and contentment, and I feel the same. Let's continue walking this path together, one day at a time. They parted with a promise to meet again the next day. As the widow returned to her quiet home, she reflected on the day's events, the laughter, the shared tasks, the heartfelt conversations. She realized that the connection they shared was growing deeper, rooted not in fleeting emotions, but in trust, respect, and the simple joy of being together. Meanwhile, the rancher returned to his ranch, the snow crunching under his boots, and thought about the widow's kindness, her resilience, and the gentle way she had touched his life. He realized that he had found someone who could understand him, someone who could share the burdens and joys of life without judgment. That night, as both settled into their homes, they carried with them a quiet, glowing sense of connection. The emotional bond they had nurtured over the past days had grown into something meaningful, something that promised comfort, companionship, and hope. Even in the cold of winter, both felt the warmth of shared understanding and trust, knowing that they were no longer walking their lives alone. And so the evening ended, leaving both hearts quietly intertwined by the experiences of the day, ready to face tomorrow together, step by step, story by story, and moment by moment. The days following their emotional Christmas gatherings passed in a quiet rhythm, filled with small moments of connection that steadily deepened the bond between the Apache widow and the rancher. Each morning brought with it a sense of anticipation, a quiet excitement that neither could quite explain, but both felt with unmistakable clarity. The snow outside continued to blanket the town in white, sparkling under the winter sun, but inside their hearts, warmth was growing in ways that words could barely capture. The widow began her days tending to her home, preparing small meals, and keeping her surroundings orderly, but she did so with an added sense of purpose. There was a new energy in her life, a reason to share her days with someone who genuinely cared. She thought often of the rancher, wondering what he might be doing, imagining him walking across the plains or tending to his animals with his usual quiet strength. She smiled at the thought, feeling a lightness in her chest she had not known for years. For the rancher, life on the ranch continued with its usual demands, yet his mind frequently wandered to the widow. He recalled her laughter, the way she spoke of memories both happy and sorrowful, and the subtle warmth she brought into every room she entered. Her presence had a way of softening his usually stoic demeanor, and he found himself looking forward to their next meeting with a quiet eagerness. One morning, the widow arrived at his ranch with a basket of warm bread and a jar of fresh preserves she had prepared. The rancher greeted her with a smile that lit up his face, revealing a side of him few had ever seen. "Good morning," he said. "You didn't have to bring anything, but I'm glad you did." She laughed softly, setting the basket on the table. "I thought we could have breakfast together. A proper start to the day seems important, don't you think?" They sat together, the table modest but filled with care and warmth. As they ate, their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and gentle teasing. They spoke of their plans for the day, shared small observations about the land, and discussed the little joys that life had to offer. It was a conversation that blended comfort with curiosity, a natural rhythm that only strengthened their connection. After breakfast, the rancher suggested they take a walk across the plains, a tradition that had quickly become their favorite way to spend time together. The widow agreed eagerly, and they set off, their footprints trailing behind them in the fresh snow. The world around them was quiet, the only sounds the soft crunch of snow beneath their feet and the distant calls of winter birds. The vast openness of the plains seemed to mirror the possibilities now unfolding between them. As they walked, they shared stories of hopes and dreams that had been tucked away for years. The widow spoke of her wish to reopen her garden in the spring, to grow flowers and herbs once again, and perhaps even to start writing about her life experiences. The rancher shared his own dreams of expanding the ranch, of building a small greenhouse to protect the plants during the winter months, and even of traveling to places he had only ever read about. In these exchanges, a quiet understanding emerged. They were learning not only about each other's pasts, but also about the aspirations that shaped their hearts. Each dream, each hope, was met with genuine interest and encouragement, fostering a sense of partnership that went beyond friendship. The widow found comfort in his support, and the rancher discovered a sense of purpose in encouraging hers. The afternoon brought them to a small frozen pond, a spot that had quickly become special to them. The widow admired the icy surface, its stillness reflecting the sky above. The rancher stood beside her, observing her reaction. "It's beautiful," he said softly, "almost like it's holding its own secret." She nodded, her eyes reflecting the soft winter light. "It feels peaceful here, like the world is waiting for us to notice the quiet beauty in it." They sat together at the edge of the pond, talking about the past year and the lessons it had taught them. They reflected on moments of joy and sorrow, recognizing that life's hardships had shaped them but had not defined them. In each other's company, they found a sense of acceptance and understanding, a reminder that true companionship could help heal old wounds. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the snowy landscape, they started walking back toward the widow's home. The conversation turned lighter again, filled with laughter and playful observations about the tracks left by animals in the snow. There was a sense of ease between them now, a comfort that came from knowing they were no longer walking through life alone. Upon returning to her home, they settled near the fire, the room filled with warmth and the gentle glow of candlelight. The widow offered tea, and they continued their conversation, exploring topics both serious and lighthearted. They spoke of the people they admired, the lessons they had learned from their families, and the small acts of kindness that had left lasting impressions. Each story shared strengthened the invisible thread connecting them, weaving a bond built on respect, empathy, and mutual appreciation. As evening deepened, the widow suggested they look at the stars. They wrapped themselves in thick blankets and stepped outside. The night sky stretched wide above them, sparkling with countless stars. The cold air bit gently at their cheeks, but the warmth of their companionship made them almost unaware of it. Standing side by side, they watched the constellations, pointing out familiar shapes and sharing stories from childhood about the stars. The rancher spoke of nights spent alone on the plains, gazing at the sky and feeling both small and infinite. The widow shared tales her husband had once told her, stories that had been passed down through generations, filled with wonder and wisdom. In that moment, a sense of timelessness enveloped them. They were not thinking about the past or the future, but simply about the beauty of the present, the joy of being together, of sharing a quiet moment that mattered more than any grand gesture could. It was a profound sense of connection, one that transcended words and left a lasting impression on their hearts. Returning inside, they prepared a simple supper together, laughing over small mishaps and enjoying the ease of companionship. The act of working side by side, sharing tasks and creating something together, reinforced their growing bond. There was no need for grand declarations. The small, consistent gestures of care and attention spoke volumes. After supper, they returned to the living room, settling near the fire once more. The rancher looked at the widow and said, "I didn't realize how much I needed this, someone to share these small moments with, someone who makes life feel lighter." The widow smiled warmly. "I feel the same way. It's not just about the big moments or the celebrations. It's about having someone who notices, who listens, and who cares." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling and the room filled with quiet comfort. The connection between them had grown into something deeper, a friendship rooted in trust, respect, and understanding, blossoming into the promise of something lasting. Neither needed to rush or define it. The moments themselves were enough. As the night drew to a close, the rancher prepared to leave, though neither wanted the evening to end. He stood at the door, looking back at the widow with sincerity in his eyes. "Thank you," he said softly, "for these past days, for your kindness, and for showing me that connection is possible, even when life feels lonely." The widow reached out, placing her hand gently on his arm. "And thank you for sharing your time and your stories. You've reminded me that life is meant to be shared, that companionship can heal and bring joy." They parted with a quiet understanding, a promise to continue spending time together, to nurture the bond that had formed so naturally between them. Both returned to their homes with hearts full of warmth, anticipation, and hope. The days that followed were filled with similar moments, shared walks, conversations by the fire, small tasks done together, and laughter that echoed softly against the walls. Each day strengthened the connection, turning simple companionship into a deep and meaningful partnership. They learned to trust each other, to rely on one another, and to celebrate the joy that came from shared experiences. By the time winter began to soften and the first hints of spring appeared, the Apache widow and the rancher had grown inseparable. Their bond was no longer fragile or tentative. It was rooted in respect, care, and a shared understanding of life's challenges and joys. Together, they discovered that even in the coldest seasons, warmth could be found. not only in the fire that burned in their homes, but in the companionship and love they had cultivated. And so, as spring approached, and the snow melted to reveal the earth beneath, both the widow and the rancher stepped forward into a new chapter of their lives. A chapter defined not by past losses or solitude, but by connection, hope, and the quiet certainty that they would no longer face life's journey alone. The world around them was bright, fresh, and full of possibility. But the true warmth, the real magic, lay in the bond they had nurtured, the knowledge that they had found in each other a friend, a confidant, and a companion for the days ahead. Christmas Eve had been the beginning, but now, every day felt like a gift, filled with laughter, shared stories, and the gentle joy of a heart no longer lonely.